Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Alec and I am from Silver Wings Coffee. Today we're going to be talking about brewing coffee at home. As I'm sure you know by now, there are a ton of different ways to make a good cup of coffee at home. There's a V60, Chemex, AeroPress, French press, so many brewing devices available. In order to start you out strong, I'm going to give you what I found to be the 7 key qualities that go into making a great cup of coffee. Let's get into it. So just as a disclaimer, this isn't to any one particular brewing device. This is consistent across all of them, but I will primarily be using V60 as an example because that is the brewing device that I know the best out of all of them. So starting out at number 1, the first thing you're going to need to do is start out with fresh, clean water. This is very important because coffee is primarily made up of 80% water. So if you're using dirty water or water that has been reboiled and recycled over and over and over again, you're going to taste it in your cup of coffee. So of course you can use filtered water, but every time I do make a new cup of coffee, I always pour out the water that's in the kettle and just refill it and use that. It's just the best and easiest way to do it. You'll see people in coffee shops doing that behind the bar all the time. Moving on to number 2, always heat your water to the correct temperature. So I have a electric gooseneck kettle and I found that I like around 180 to 185 degrees. And that roughly translates to bringing a kettle up to boiling water and then taking it off for about 30 to 45 seconds. The reason the water temperature is so important is because if you're using too hot of water and pouring that directly onto the coffee, it can kind of burn it and you'll get this weird bittery taste in your coffee, which you don't want. And on the flip side, if it's too cold, you're also going to notice that, and it's going to be almost like a under extracted cup of coffee. So I recommend, no matter what kind of kettle you have, if it's stovetop, if it's electric, somewhere around the 180 to 185 degrees. Some may say that that's on the lower end. Other people choose to do around 200 degrees, but I found that that is too much for me, and I personally like it around 180 to 185. If that doesn't work out for you and you can actually taste it, then feel free to experiment and find out what you like the best. Number 3, always preheat your equipment. If you don't preheat your equipment and you pouring your freshly hot water into a Chemex or a V60, for instance, it's going to lower the temperature of your coffee, which again results in a soury, under-extracted taste. Preheating your equipment also serves another purpose because you always want to pre-wet your filter to get rid of that papery taste. So for instance, for a V60 or a Chemex or an AeroPress, I always put the filter in there, pour the hot water over it, and that gets rid of any papery taste that's in the filter, but it also heats up the V60 and the cup that I'm pouring into. Also, if you're not brewing directly into the mug that you're going to be drinking out of, before your brew is done, I highly recommend just pouring hot water into the cup to making sure that is also ready. Moving on to number 4. Number 4 is measuring and using a proper brew ratio. I'm probably going to say this a lot in this video, but this is, in my opinion, one of the most important steps in all of this. So in order to measure out your coffee, you're going to need a scale that measures in grams. And we do this because it's the most exact way to measure your coffee and to dictate whatever brew ratio that you want. Every coffee shop that you'll go into, if they're really good and if they're a specialty coffee shop, they use a scale and a timer in order to measure their brew because they're timing it for consistency reasons, and they're also making sure that they get the proper brew ratio. So what is a brew ratio? To put it simply, it's the amount of coffee to the amount of water that you're brewing with. So for drip coffee or for a V60, that could be anywhere from a 1 to 15 coffee ratio to a 1 to 17. And that means for every 1 gram of coffee, you have 15 grams of water. A lot of coffee shops will brew at different ratios. For instance, I know there are some that brew at a 1 to 15 or a 1 to 17. Some even go as low as 1 to 14. Personally, I prefer a 1 to 14 or a 1 to 15 coffee ratio because it just tastes better to me. A 1 to 17 or even a 1 to 18 just tastes too weak, and I don't feel like I'm actually drinking coffee and I can't feel the body of it. But for a 1 to 14 or a 1 to 15, that is my sweet spot. And this is where things get really fun because you get to experiment and find out what you actually like and what works best for you. You may like a 1 to 16. You may like a 1 to 13. You may prefer a 1 to 15 in a V60 and a 1 to 17 in a Chemex. It just kind of depends. I highly recommend just pulling out a notebook, writing down the amount of coffee that you're using, the brew ratio, and any notes or thoughts that you liked about it. That's a really good way for you to visually see what you liked and what you didn't like and kind of, dialing in your own recipe from there. Moving on to number 5. Number 5 is using freshly roasted whole bean coffee. Every time I get a new bag of coffee and I open it up for the first time and I smell the beans, it's the best feeling. I absolutely love it. So a couple things on this. In order to get the best quality cup of coffee, you're going to need the best quality cup of beans. You should invest a little bit into it. And that doesn't mean you need to spend a lot of money necessarily, but I know a lot of shops have great quality beans for a pretty reasonable price. Now, if you live in an area that has a specialty coffee shop or a roaster or something of the sort, I would honestly just walk in there, ask the barista what kind of beans they like, and have a conversation with them and, go from there. And you'll probably find a really good bag of beans that you actually really like. If you don't like it, move on to the next bag. You'll find out what kind of coffee you like. You'll find out if you like single origins, blends, light roast, dark roast, and it just kind of gets you to visualize and see what kind of coffee you like. And then, when you come back and brew it, you can take notes again and see, okay, I really like that bag of coffee, or I really prefer this one. And, after I've been doing this for a couple of years, I know which shop and which beans that I go to all the time, just so I know that I can get a good cup of coffee. Now that is the best case scenario, having a coffee shop or a roaster very close to you, because that means the roast date is going to be within the last 48 to 72 hours, which is beautiful. Another option, which actually might be the best for you if you don't have a coffee shop around the corner from you, is using a site called Trade Coffee. Trade sources a bunch of different coffees from roasters, and every time you buy a bag, they normally roast it within the last 48 to 72 hours of shipping. So you are going to get a very freshly roasted bag of coffee. And it's kind of nice because you get to try out different coffees you wouldn't necessarily try before. You can try roasters from Portland or Seattle or Austin, Texas, or really wherever you want. So I highly recommend them. This video is not sponsored by them by any means. I just really like using them. They have great customer service. Yeah, I've used them many, many times and they are awesome. Next up is number 6, which is timing and consistency. This is where things can fall apart very easily if you're not careful. And what I mean by timing is just the overall time that it takes for your coffee to drain. If you really want to get scientific and if you really want to deep dive into coffee, you're going to have to time your coffee and look at the flow rate and how fast or slow your coffee is, flowing through the filter. Many coffee experts use different techniques or different brewing methods or different filters, and they just figure out like their best recipe just by timing it. The second is all about consistency. It's the consistency of your pour, how fast you're moving the kettle. To start out, I highly just recommend looking up a simple recipe and using that for whatever brewing device you're using. Experiment with it a little bit. This step or technique is all about experimentation, finding out what you like and how you can change your coffee recipe for the better. Finally, number 7, which is brewing only what you plan to drink. If there's one thing the coffee industry hates and is constantly trying to improve of, is waste. We don't like wasting milk, we don't like wasting water, cups, anything and any chance we can cut down on waste, we try to do it. If you only want 1 cup of coffee, use a V60 or an AeroPress. If you want multiple, a Chemex or a French press work great. And this is obviously very easy, but it's something that has to be said because I'm really passionate about making sure that the waste in the coffee industry goes down a lot, and that can even start with you at home. Okay, wow, that was it. That is all of the 7 qualities that go into making a great cup of coffee. If you have any questions or if there's anything else that you'd like for me to touch on, please leave them in the comments below and I will make a video for you. We also do have a blog, and that is going to be down in the description for you to check out. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. This has been Alec from Silver Wings Coffee, and I will be here brewing coffee for the next video. Join me, won't you?